management, and also looking at ESG within the government and public sector. So yeah, thanks Ludwig for the honor of actually doing this presentation with you.
Thank you so much. So we are going to discuss a little bit of a controversial, thorny, not so easy to talk topic about this morning, specifically looking at social cohesion and how important that is from South African context, and also how important addressing social cohesion is if we want to actually achieve our outcomes in terms of net zero, climate change, and actually get the changes in place that we want to get in place. So, you can see, seems to be working. Are you okay? Okay. Oh, do we need to start again? Okay. Okay. So, yeah, we've seen quite a few things happening in South Africa over the last year or so, over and above COVID. In the middle of last year, we had protests in KZN that also then spilled over to the rest of the country. And KZN has also been unfortunate enough to see the flooding in April of this year, which again seriously uprooted and impacted the communities living there. And businesses have been severely impacted in that instance as well. So the key message that we want to say today is that it's really important that we understand as businesses in South Africa to be able to continue successfully operating in that environment. We need to see how we can contribute to building thriving societies and communities. It's not only about survival, it's really about thriving communities and thriving societies and where we operate. And what role do we play in that? And as business, that has seriously changed, I think, over the last couple of years. That has been my perception, and I think Nina would agree with me as well. But we still have some ways to go, and we still tend to be reactive. So when things happen, we intervene. When things happen, we think about how does it impact business continuity, but we don't necessarily think about what are the options available to us to get involved in building this thriving society before things go wrong. And that is really the message that we want to share with you today. Is to say, how do we as business get involved in doing that before things go wrong? So what you see up there is just a bit of a reminder of just also from a financial aspect. The government in South Africa is also severe pressure in terms of funding. So in total, the government has available about 13 billion rands between its budget in February and where it is now to spend on additional areas in the recovery and rebuild of the economy. And about half of that is in fact going towards assisting KZN in flood relief and actually rebuilding infrastructure, etc. That's not all the money that's going, but it just shows you that half of what happening is going to spend extra over the next year is actually to address the impacts of flooding. And then on top of that, we still have to deal with the impacts of the social or the horizon projects last year in that area as well. So, if we move on to the next slide, so we took a little bit of poetic license here, if I may. We looked at the World Economic Forum's Global Risk Report that they publish every year. And the interesting thing in their latest report is the new one coming out in a couple of months, but the one that we have now is with a look at what the risks have actually worsened most significantly since the start of COVID. And social cohesion is number one. From a global perspective, it came out top. And also, if you look at obviously the other issues that are listed there, no surprise, if you look at climate change inaction, etc. If you look at the top 5 risks that we're dealing with there, it's social and environmental in nature. And that is what businesses and organizations globally are saying to us, they're the most worried about, and that is worsened most significantly since the start of COVID. Now, the interesting thing is, if you look at the risk of the report, they also went into what do they believe are the key risks for us over the short to medium term, medium to long term. And the one thing that stood out to me is that social cohesion and climate change action remains on the list and remains part of the key risks that we need to deal with as society. Social cohesion moves a little bit down in terms of the ranking that it has. If you look at it as a risk, so there seems to be some belief in that's how I interpret it, that we will be able to address that a little bit better in the next couple of years. But one aspect that unfortunately moves up there is the impact of climate change inaction. So we are absolutely not sure that we are able to address that. But we think that both social cohesion and climate change inaction and significant risks of that remain key. You see also those survey CEOs where they ask them what they perceive as the most important risks that they will have to deal with over the next year or so. And if you look at it from a South African context, the lack of social cohesion, potential social instability was the #1 issue that kept South African CEOs away. About 75% of them said US series was concerned about. So if you think about it from that perspective, obviously it should be something that receives a lot of attention. But the challenge that we sit with is we aren't always sure how to deal with it. It's something that is it's difficult, it's sensitive, it's not as clear as certain of the other challenges. If I can get back to you, so we've seen now from a societal perspective, the perception of risk and how that's changed. Can you tell us a little bit more about specifically what you've seen in South Africa and potential?
Thanks, Lulu, for that. If we look at this slide, I think one of the key things that we discussed as well, do we have the potential for more social unrest? And I think the answer in short is yes. There was a study done by IHS Markit, which indicated that given the socio and the governance challenges, socioeconomic and governance challenges that we have in South Africa, we have the 4th highest risk globally of protests and riots. So we, as Lulu has indicated, we have seen this in the July unrest, and a lot of that was caused because of the wealth in disparity. We know the politics within the country, but also just the high level of unemployment and the lack of social cohesion that we are finding within South Africa. So I think bringing climate change and the effects of these climate events to the table, that can even lead to more social unrest if we do not address it as government and the private sector together. Yesterday in the Salga that Salga chaired in the panel session, one of the presenters was speaking about the role that private sector played in actually supporting eThekwini and KZN with some of the flood interventions that was being done. And again, I think that if that support was not there by private sector, we might have had a situation again where people, because of now, their housing has been destroyed, their place of business has been destroyed, they have to rebuild, could have led to an unrest situation again, So it just again emphasizes the importance of governments as well as private sector to come to the party to address this. We are seeing quite a few climate change events, not just in terms of flooding, but also in terms of drought within South Africa. And again, how we're going to address that as a society is going to have an impact in terms of how people are going to respond to it, whether it's going to be a peaceful response or a not so peaceful response. As Lulu also indicated, in the PwC Global CEO survey that was done, 3 out of 4 South African CEOs are very or extremely concerned about the fallout of social inequality negatively impacting on their business. During the July 21 riots that we had, the biggest fears that came out from businesses was, first of all, the security of people, secondly, the physical loss of their infrastructure, and also the loss of sales and income. And I think that amounted to about 40 billion rand lost for private sector and businesses. And obviously a loss to business is a loss to communities in terms of the income that they need to actually sustain themselves. So I think also key important factor that can contribute to social unrest that the South African Reserve Bank has highlighted is the fact that the rising cost in food and transport prices, especially on your lower income people, is becoming more and more problematic. And you're finding that there was one individual that indicated that he's earning such a low income that it's easier for him to actually not work than work because of the cost that he has to spend on transport just to get to work. So that disparity between wealth and low income, it's a huge contributor to social unrest, and it's something that we will need to address as a society. Just moving on to the next slide, Lulu. For me, I think that was a few of the reasons that I've indicated, but what could be some of the other reasons behind the lack of social cohesion within South Africa?
Obviously, the income disparity and inequality, we have the highest levels of unemployment globally. All of that are massively important contributing factors. The fact of the matter is, if we look at where we are now, it's really difficult for people to get out of that poverty trap and actually improve their situation for a whole range of reasons. What you see here in front of you, that really shocked me when I saw this. It's from a UN report as well that look at the ability for people to move upwards socially, a social mobility index. And according to that, they didn't look at all countries globally, but they looked at quite a few. In South Africa, it will take 9 generations for you to get you from, if you're in the lowest income household brackets, to get to the median income or the average income in society. And the other country that's equal to that, unfortunately, is Brazil. But as I said, I had to read it and reread it a few times because, you know, if you're talking 9 generations, it's always enough to send a message to people that they should give up. And we really need to change that. And on the next slide, that's some of the reasons why we are in this position. If you look at the details, so you see that there's little triangles that represent where other middle income countries are, so our peers, if we could call it that, and how they're doing on specific aspects versus how South Africa is doing. And for me, one of the key messages from this is to say, if we really want to enable people to have the tools to get themselves out of poverty and get themselves into a better situation, what are the aspects that we should be looking at? And the two that really stands out there is health and education. The others, of course, very important as well. If you look at work opportunities, that's the other one, of course. As I said earlier, we have the highest levels of unemployment globally. But health and education, if we as businesses want to look at an opportunity where we can have an impact on what is happening to society, those are obviously in South Africa, those are obviously of key importance. And it's probably, I want to say, the low-hanging fruit in terms of where we can get involved. Now, I think the challenge, if you compare ourselves again to some other developing and middle income countries globally, we actually spend quite a lot of money in those areas. It's not as though we don't spend money. We do spend a lot of money. But the focus, and I think that is something that has been discussed here and at previous COPs and everywhere, is, and when we look at ESG, is to look at outcomes instead of inputs, and the real impact of what we're doing. And that is a mindset shift that still needs to happen. Again, there's a lot of businesses that we've come across that is already thinking in that way. If you look at the SDGs, they really say to themselves, let's decide which are the areas where we can have an impact. Let's decide what is most material and most important for us as a business, and where we can really influence, and where the SDGs speak to our core business. But there's still, we speak a lot about green washing, but I think there's some rainbow washing that's happening as well with the SDGs. There's still a lot of businesses that are, just looking at a connection with any of the SDGs without necessarily understanding the underlying targets and KPIs that's associated with it. So they just look at an SDG and then decide, okay, we can link, some of our business activities or spending to that. So one of the key messages that we are giving back to clients is to say, don't try and do that. First of all, figure out what is most material to you, most important to your stakeholders, and what you can truly have an impact on. Do you understand the underlying KPIs and targets that's part of the SDGs? Do you understand how you can impact that? And, it's absolutely fine not to try and play a role everywhere, because you can't. Rather, make sure that you have an impact where it is important and where it links to your business. And really look at the impact again of what you're spending, or what you're spending is resulting in, rather than I'm spending this much or this much. So yeah. Nina, if we can move on. So, and I suppose that is the challenge with social cohesion. It's not a simple thing. It has lots of different aspects. In doing this research, we tried to get a bit of a feel of all of the different aspects that are important if you are looking at social cohesion. Can you share a little bit more of that with us, what we've seen?
Okay, no, thanks, Lulu, for that. I think, as you can see here on the screen, the research done by the University of Cape Town, Poverty and Inequality Initiative, has identified 5 measurable dimensions of social cohesion in South Africa. And I think those 5 also speaks to some of the areas where we are not doing so well and what we can do to improve it. The first one is social relationships. And basically what we have there is that the Global Trustworthiness Report that was done in 2022 showed that only 3 out of 10 South Africans actually feel that the country and that their fellow South Africans are trustworthy. And I mean, that is quite shocking. And this score has been relatively the same since 2019. And with the recent survey, has not really improved in terms of the perception that South Africans have of the country as well as their fellow citizens. And one of the big reasons quoted in this study is the whole issue around the wealth in disparity that I think we have spoken about, but also issues around xenophobia. And what we found was that, and some of the results, and according to the United Nations Right Watch, is that foreign nationals are almost blamed for some of the problems that we have within South Africa. And the reason for that is government not actually providing the services as what they should be, and not providing those services to South Africans as what they should be, and then the blaming game starts. So that was one of the reasons that I think is quite important, and something that we need to address especially as the South African government. Secondly is a sense of belonging. So since the dawn of democracy, South Africans have seen quite a few new political parties. When the first elections happened in 1998, there were about 7 political parties. At the moment, there's about 14 that have got seats in parliament. And again, the reason is because South Africans do not have a sense of belonging in terms of those parties that are representing them. And that is why they are actually looking for more and more for those parties that can actually speak to the issues that are important to them. What we've also seen in terms of the elections was the number of people that are registered to vote. So linking back to the trust issue and the belonging, we're finding that less and less South Africans are actually registering to vote. And that was quite evident in the municipal elections that we had recently, where less than 50% of those that can vote actually voted. So that is also one of the issues because of that lack of trust and not believing in government that's actually leading to some of these issues as well. The other issue that was raised in the report was inclusion. And again, the inclusion speaks about your, just your ability, the inequality that is linked to that. I think in the second quarter of the report that we have, our unemployment is currently standing at 44.1%. I mean, that is quite a lot of people that are currently that are either discouraged or unemployed. And that increased from 5.3 million to about 12 million people. And I mean, that's a lot of people that do not have access to formal employment, and that in itself also creates this feeling of not being included within the workforce and within the economic growth of the country. Legitimacy. There was another report done by the institute, the Trust in South Africans, which institutions, it's showing that it's quite weak. There was a study done by the Transparency International Global Corruption Barometer. And what was interesting was that the report showed that 49% of those that participated feels that the police are corrupt. 44% felt that politicians and government are also not trustworthy and that they are corrupt. So there is a huge lack of faith within government institutions because of the fact that the perception is that government and its different agencies and officials are corrupt. And I think that's an important parameter, especially when we have to work with business, having to work with government and finding those ways and solutions in terms of how they can do that and have proper governance structures where these issues can almost be eliminated. And then lastly, participation. So again, coming back to just your local government elections, people are not participating in your local and your political environment because just of, just that lack of trust in terms of where they are and government's ability to actually employ them or create employment, and also to make sure that, they are safe and feel that they are part of this country. So some of the things that we can look at in terms of addressing social cohesion again is to look at how do we implement comprehensive ESG approaches. So as Lulu has indicated, it's not just a tick box exercise. It's about understanding what does it mean for me as government, as private sector, what is applicable to my business, and how do I actually support those institutions driving it to actually make it better. And Lulu, just the next slide. If you look at just the ESGs, the SDGs in total, I mean, South Africa is 108 out of 163 countries in terms of where we are in terms of implementing the SDGs. So as we can see, there are 2 that we are saying that we might achieve by 2030, which is basically your gender equality as well as responsible consumption and production. So there's a lot of work to be done. I mean, we've heard a lot about access to services, community inclusion, poverty, which is quite big. And as Lulu has indicated, how do we work together to actually make sure that we address the SDGs and that we actually, support each other as private sector and government in achieving this. It's not to say that everybody's got the same level of responsibility towards the SDGs, but what is applicable to your company and how do we actually drive that together with our partners to ensure that we address the SDGs? Because at this pace, I mean, we'll get new resolutions coming from COP27, but we haven't even started on what's already on the table. And I think that for me is something that we really need to look at and see how do we take that further. So with that, I think I've spoken a lot about the emphasis on private sector, but I think Lulu, thinking about private sector, what more can they do to actually support government and think differently about how they're doing ESG and social cohesion?
Thanks, Nina. Yeah, there we go. So what you see here is a bit of a view in terms of what the perception currently is in the market from different players, where they find themselves. Right at the bottom where it's really around compliance. So just doing what we need to do, reporting on what we need to report on, up to getting to a point where it's about, making purpose part of what you are as an organization. And I think that's a discussion that is, maybe it's a little bit of confirmation bias, I don't know, but I think that has picked up immense speed over the last 2 or so years, where companies have said that, in addressing purpose, addressing the SDGs, addressing climate change, addressing ESG, whatever you want to call it, and slice it and dice it in whichever ways you want to look at it. It should become part of our fiber and our DNA as organizations. It's easier said than done, though. And I think that's a journey that we've also been on with quite a few companies to say, what are the areas where we can actually have an influence? What are the areas that truly connect to who we are as an organization and what we do with our business and how we go to market and our products, etc. And also, we had a discussion earlier this week with NASPASH process. One of the key things that we've come across that is important in organizations to actually achieve a point where purpose is truly part of who they are as a business is the cultural change that's needed to do that. It's interesting. I work in the strategy space a lot. So, we come up with wonderful strategies for clients to say, okay, these are the things that you need to focus on. These are the things that we think that is important for you, that's important for your other stakeholders. And, now we need to implement it. And then we start looking at data and processes and getting the right people in place, etc. But then sometimes it feels like you hit a little bit of a wall. And it's because everybody in the organization is not on the same page. Everybody doesn't understand what their role is in actually achieving this. And I think if I may take permission, even in PwC, it was a process for us to get our colleagues to understand that sustainability is not an issue that is dealt with by a small group of individuals in the organization. It is something that speaks to every part of what we do, and all of us should get involved, whether we're looking at it internally in terms of what we do as PwC, but also how we advise clients. Because, and again, I think happily I can report and say that it's really changed, but it was a process to get people to understand where they fit in and what they do, and that addressing sustainability is not the prerogative of a small group of people. And I think that is something that we're really taking to our clients as well, to say, do people understand? Yes, everybody does not have the same role and responsibility. And there are certain people where you can say the buck stops here, in terms of putting the strategy and the approach together. but it's really, really important for businesses to understand, and the different parts of the business to understand and buy in to what the organization is trying to achieve. So yeah, I suppose the important thing is here is just being honest in terms of where you are as an organization. I think that's the other thing that was quite interesting. You know, you start, people will often say to you, oh, but we are purpose driven. And sometimes that decisions have been made from, you know, by leadership and from the front, but does it filter through? And it's about, you know, talking the talk and walking the walk, both of those. And the other important thing, I think, and that is also something that was discussed in quite a few conversations, you know, is also, and that is part of that move from a compliance mindset to a mindset where businesses are really driven by purpose and what they're trying to achieve, is also understanding that there's not only risks, but also massive opportunity in this. Again, I want to refer to a piece of research that was done by some of my colleagues, where we asked the question to businesses, tell us about, you know, climate change and the risks, the cost associated with the risk that you believe that there is to your organization versus the opportunities. And the numbers are not important because, I mean, who knows? But we're trying all kinds of ways to understand it. And there's very different views and different ways to look at it. But the important thing for me was that the perceived risks were, and this was in the beginning of the year, were 10 times as high as the perceived opportunities. So, so the important thing again is for organizations to think about, but, you know, how can I also, and this is, yes, of course, profit plays into it, but that is not the main driver or the main reason for this discussion. It is about understanding that there's opportunities for you to be ahead of the curve. You will be viewed different by stakeholders, by communities where you operate if you do things differently. And that is really part of the conversation that we're trying to have, and to get people to move beyond that point where they think that the household or housekeeping things, not household, housekeeping things are really what they need to do. And those are the groundbreaking things. It's not. It's about being brave and saying, well, how do I stretch myself beyond what everybody else is doing currently? And that is the conversation that we're trying to have as well with our clients and with private sector. So the next slide. There we go. It's basically just a bit of a view, and it's one view. It's a single view. If you just look at the financing required to address the SDG gap that we're sitting with in the country, it's about 500 billion rand, and it will come and could come from various sources. You know, right through from private sector. To government, to foreign direct investment, to development finance institutions, etc. But you know, if you just look at that, it already tells you that there's massive opportunities for business to get involved and to provide solutions to address the SDGs and achieving that. The slide you had earlier showing where we are in terms of SDGs and our outcomes, etc. And every year that we don't do that, that gap grows. So if we don't do it this year, the next year, it won't be 500 billion rand. It will be more than that, that we need to actually achieve. And of course, there's risk in that as well. But and I'm not saying that we should wait for it to grow. That's the last thing that I'm saying. But the important message is just if you look at how much economic activity is needed to actually respond to this, it is important for companies to start realizing that this is not only a regulatory requirement. This is not only a tick box thing. This is not something that I just should get done and then move on to something else. There's real ways and means for me to make a difference in society. The next slide is kind of a similar picture. We just looked at you know, what is needed from, and it's again not a perfect view, but you know, some institutions that's linked to these SDG activities and what they believe is required to actually achieve the SDGs, you know, right through to I think if you ask any South African, the very famous ESCOM at this point in time as well, what we need to do there. But it gives us a bit of a view in terms of what is needed. And also, if you look at government funding, that is the important thing. You know, we like to sit back and say, oh, but government should do this and government should do that, etc. And the reality is, as private sector and businesses operating in South Africa, we cannot do that. Government finances are under severe pressure, and we really need to think about ways and solutions in which we can work together differently from what we did in the past to achieve what we've set out. And I think that's where I want to hand back to you, Nina. You have been working on a very interesting project. It's taken quite a few years, but you're getting there, where you've done exactly this in terms of, you know, different way of government and private sector working together to achieve outcomes. So I'm going to hand back to you. And yeah, if I can just...
Thanks, Lulu. I think
no, there we go.
We didn't want to end off with just showing all doom and gloom and, you know, just negativity. I think it's important to note that, you know, there's a lot of strife being made between government and private sector to actually start working together towards, you know, just uplifting communities, addressing ESGs as well as socioeconomic development. And one of the projects that I have been working on is within the Limpopo province within South Africa, where you've got a lot of the platinum mines that are operating within that area. So a big thing for them is water is quite a key driver in terms of their business. And what we had was a situation where this large pipeline was going to the mine, supplying water to them, passing through communities who did not have access to that water and had to go and get water out of the river, out of a borehole. And obviously, because of that, it caused a lot of anger and resentment towards these mining companies. This resulted in a lot of vandalism and a lot of protests and even loss of lives in this area. And about 4 years ago, we started working with these mining companies and we said, okay, guys, you are compliant to ESG. You are looking at your SLPs in terms of your social labor plans, but what more can you do to actually try and avert the situation and actually try and turn around the situation that you are facing? At that stage, when we started being part of the project, any breakdown in the pipeline was almost 50 to 100 million rand of loss in revenue for those mines. And what we said was, instead of only using that money to cover vandalism and to cover the repair of infrastructure, why don't you invest it within those communities? And what we then did as PwC, we basically created or facilitated a public-private collaboration model. So my terminology is very specific. It's not a PPP, but it's a collaboration between government and the mining sector. First of all, to look at how do we upgrade the water resources infrastructure in that province. And then secondly, once that has been done, provide potable water to the households in those communities up to a yard connection. So those from South Africa would know that a basic level of service is a standpipe in a community, but the mine said, let's go further than that. And we actually provide them with a yard connection. The total project is about 25 billion rand, which is about 1.4 billion US dollars. And the mining companies are providing 50% of the capital for both the potable and the raw water infrastructure. And government, which is the municipalities in that area, as well as the National Department of Water and Sanitation, will be providing the other 50%. What was key about this project was that When we started, there were no trust between government and the mining sector. The government thought that the mines are arrogant. We don't want to work with you. You want to dictate to us what we need to do. The mining companies thought government is corrupt. If we put our money in government, it's going to go into this big hole and we're going to lose it. And what we facilitated was that there are proper governance structures set up between the mining companies and government that is managed and regulated by specific agreements around the implementation of the projects, the funding requirements, the staffing and the resourcing. And we actually got the Minister of Water and Sanitation to launch this project at the mining Indaba that happened in May in Cape Town, as well as launching it within the communities of Limpopo. So what is key about this project is that this is the first time you've got government, private sector actually collaborating to provide something to communities that is not just a once-off. A key spin-off and benefit of the project is also the socioeconomic development aspect of it. So we've identified 5 key areas in terms of, because what we were asking ourselves is, if the mines close down, what is going to stimulate the economy in this area? And we said we have to create a secondary economy for communities to be able to prosper. And what we did was to identify 5 key areas in terms of what we need to do. First of all, we had to grow enterprises. So how do we stimulate or build local economies around the infrastructure that's needed for the pipeline to be built? Secondly, connectivity. We know that as we were all sitting here, the first thing we tried to do was to get a Wi-Fi connection. So imagine you're in a community where you are not connected to the global platform, and the mines are saying, let's work together with service providers to actually connect communities, and not just for connection, but also for education. Thirdly, we looked at education from your childhood, early education unto high school. So how do we nurture children to actually get the right education and the right career guidance so that we can actually employ them within water, within infrastructure, within the mining sector? And those that are not wanting to be engineers or mining geologists, can we actually create colleges where they can go and practice their artisanship and, just helping them to have the skills to go out in the job market and actually be competitive. We're also looking at agriculture and food security in terms of how can we support local farmers in terms of just providing the necessary water for them and the skills to actually start doing subsistence farming in the beginning, but then also looking at expanding that into commercial farming as well. So there's a lot of initiative investments that not just the mines, but government is making to uplift this community. And what is great about this project was when the mines in other provinces saw what we are doing with government, they were saying, we want to do something similar. We have now expanded this project into the Northern Cape of South Africa, where you've got also your palladium mines that are working within that area. And they're saying we want to do something similar. We don't just want to do a basic build a school here, build a clinic here. We want to make a significant impact, and we want to do that together with government. Mpumalanga, another province, similar something has happened. The coal mines are saying, but guys, can we help? And I think what's amazing about this program is not just about them achieving the ESG targets or just compliance, but it's going that extra mile to actually form that partnership with government and looking at how do we stimulate the economy, but how do we help our communities that we work in. So as you can hear, I'm quite passionate about this because community upliftment for me is important. Just going into a project and doing a small piece of work, we don't need that. I think we need sustained outcomes, and we need that economic growth that needs to happen within South Africa. And I think this is a great project. What we've also seen was not just with the mining sector, but we've got businesses now like your Nestle's and your different consumer goods services companies that are in municipalities and saying, but how can we help? And for me, it's like we've reached a point where we have actually realized that we cannot do things on our own or in a vacuum. And I think government, it took a while to get them on board. a lot of toing and froing, but they actually realize, okay, private sector is actually serious. They are not trying to, get something out of us. They're actually trying to help. And that for me has been amazing. So Lulu, yeah, I think that is what I wanted to say about this project. If anybody wants to know more about how we're doing it and what the structures is that we're putting in place to do that, you're more than welcome to have a chat with me in terms of that. Thanks, Lulu.
Yeah, and I think obviously we've spoken a lot about communities and society, etc. And the question is, how does all of this bring us back to what we discussing here at COP? And I think there's an important thing that I've picked up in South Africa. So obviously we didn't directly speak about this, but if you think about this, it has very important implications about how we address the just transition process in our country. It's a massive issue for us and something that's very important. And one thing that I've picked up is that there seems to still be a perception that it's an either or. If we address climate change, we're going to lose jobs and it's going to have a negative, economic implications, etc. There are still some pockets in society that has that view, and part of what we are really trying to drive is to say that it's not an either or. It is an and we can do both. We can address climate change and create jobs. We can address climate change and look at just transition from both aspects, from both sides, because the discussion has been really driven, by how do we address the negative implications of transitioning our economy away from a carbon-driven energy into cleaner energy solutions. How do we do that? How should we do that? And there's been a very big focus. And as an economist, I myself fell into that trap in the beginning to say, well, how do we do that? But what we seem to lose in the conversation is also the flip side, to say it's really not a just transition either if we don't do anything, or if we just look at protecting the jobs that we might potentially lose out of transitioning the economy. It's also extremely unjust, and we spoke earlier around, the impact of the flooding, etc. If you look at the potential impact that climate change will have on those communities. So it's truly, it's about having a look at that and having the conversation and having policy that considers both ends of that conversation. And the same goes with how private sector is engaging with this. And again, I want to say, and maybe it's a little bit of confirmation bias, but I personally feel that there's been a massive shift in thinking the last year or so, where the conversation is truly started to be considered from both ends of how the transition will be not or unjust if we fail to address either the jobs that will be lost transitioning away from a carbon energized economy, or if we don't do it. Both of that will not be a just outcome. I want to just very briefly leave you with two other pieces. So, by the way, this piece of thought leadership is published on Monday. Will be on our website. We will send communications out via all the social media platforms, etc. So you're the first to see it, hot off the press. And then over and above this example that Nino gave, we also consider a whole bunch of other initiatives that companies can undertake to address and get involved in improving social cohesion in the country. Of course, there's certain places where we don't want to get involved. But yeah, we give you some examples of that, ranging from wage equality or inequality and how we address that to actually having these very innovative models around collaborating with other companies. And that's the important thing as well, that I think that came out of this project, is that we got different companies from private sector to work together and government. So collaboration with other companies, but also collaborating with government. And then, there we go. Sorry, we've published two other pieces of thought leadership also this week. So I want to do a quick bit of marketing for that. This is an excerpt of our net zero index that was published globally. And this is specifically a South African view that we've extracted. So you can have a look at it. We do have the QR code right at the end now, where I'll share that. And yeah, unfortunately, as you see from that picture, we've known that, but we are not on a sustainable path in terms of how we've managed to reduce carbon emissions in the economy. And also, you know, in terms of how it relates to growth. Last year, it was a bit of a fluke if you look at the growth aspect, because it was just that bounce back from COVID. But if we're back to a normal growth, GDP growth trajectory of around 1.5%, and our emissions grow by the factors that we are seeing now, then obviously it gives a very clear indication that we are not on a good path and that we need to make some serious changes. But both the global thought leadership that looks at the net zero index globally, as well as the South African view is available on our website. And then the last bit, there we go. Trust a lawyer to do this, but it was actually quite interesting reading. One of our energy lawyers in the team looked at the energy regulation that we currently have in the country versus the environmental regulation, and how those two don't necessarily support each other and pull in the same direction. And it's making that transition that I showed on the previous slide that much more complex. And, you know, sitting with the load shedding and access issues combined with the need to transition our economy, it is really necessary for us to get those two harmonized. So that's another piece of thought leadership. I think it was published on Tuesday. If you're interested in reading that, as I said, it's a lawyer that put it together, but it's actually quite interesting reading, even for us non-lawyers, to see what things we need to do to actually address that gap if we want to transition the economy. And yeah, just want to give you the QR code if you're interested. There we go. So that's the net zero viewpoint. But as I said, the other thought leadership will also be the one that we presented to you this morning will also be available from Monday. So hot off the press. Thank you so much, everybody. And thank you for braving the first session. I think there is a little bit of, about 4 minutes, but if there's anybody that wants to have a discussion about this, Nina and I will still be around for a bit, and you're very welcome to engage with us on this. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. Hi, Matthew.
Morning, everyone.
Brian?
Hello, this is Brian.
Hi, Brian. Just checking if you have a presentation.
No, just speaking.
Okay, can we test your video quickly?
Sure. That's me. Can you see me?
Yes, I can see you.
Good.
Hi, Dudu.
Hi there.
Hi, may we check your video as well?
Okay. That's me.
Beautiful, thank you.
Okay.
All right.
Sampai 9 malam. Ya, ada itu tadi saya ada dapat email untuk yang 6 poin.
Here's Paul. What? Oh, they can't see me. Okay. Okay.
Okay. Okay. Matthew, can you hear me? This is Jinsan.
Yes, Jinsan, I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, great, perfect. So Paul is joining virtually. What about Maria is joining virtually,
Maria is joining virtually later as well. Yeah.
Okay.
I sent you a WhatsApp, but it seems it doesn't work.
I see. Here the internet connection is very
Okay.
poor, so maybe that's why I couldn't receive it. Okay, thank you. Perfect.
Switch this camera off. The one that you busy with. Yeah. So who's starting? Yeah. But you
Matthew,
Yes.
can you hear me?
Yeah.
This is Jinsan.
Yes, Jinsan, I can hear.
Matthew? We're about to start.
Yes, that's perfect. Thank you.
Oh.
Hello? Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the event of the IEA's Global Dialogue on the Labor Implications of a People-Centered Clean Energy Transitions. I'm Jinsun Lim, Energy and Environment Policy Analyst of the IEA. I would like to open this session with the opening remarks from Mr. Brian Motherway, Head of Energy Efficiency of the International Energy Agency. Brian, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Jinsun, and good morning, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be with you. I'm sorry that I'm not there in a much sunnier and warmer place than where I am this morning. And I particularly want to thank our friends in South Africa for hosting this event this morning. We're delighted to be at the South Africa Pavilion talking about this very important issue. I'm delighted to have so many eminent speakers from key countries and key experts. So thank you all for participating, and thanks everybody for joining us. This is a really important issue we're discussing, particularly now in the midst of a global energy crisis that is affecting so many people in different ways, but it really reminding us of the importance of energy issues, particularly as we also face a very urgent and pressing climate crisis. And I think we realize that these two crises are solved in the same way. They're solved through clean energy policies that increase our energy efficiency, increase our use of clean energies, and help us move as quickly and smoothly away from our dependencies across the world on fossil fuels. But they also remind us through the hardships that people are facing that all clean energy policies are about people and for people. They're about helping people find meaningful and good quality jobs. They're about helping people improve their daily lives, be comfortable and healthy, be able to move around, be able to live productive lives, be able to look after themselves and their families and their communities. And that's why the alignment between clean energy policies and just transitions, people-centered transitions, is so central and so important to the debate here and now, particularly in the countries we're going to hear from this morning. And that's why the IEA has been working on this issue with governments around the world, principally through a process many of you might have heard of called the Global Commission for People-Centered Clean Energy Transitions, where we brought together ministers and experts and leading thinkers from around the world to really explore what we mean by the concept of people-centered transitions, just transitions, and what we have learned from good practices around the world, how governments can make sure all of their policies are people-centered and inclusive. And more recently, we are very pleased to have convened with our colleagues in the labour sector, the Global Clean Energy Labour Council. And you're going to be hearing from a couple of really eminent members of that council shortly, including Lebo. Lebo, it's great to see you and thanks for joining us. And also we'll be hearing from Maria a little later as well. And we're very grateful to both of you and all of our good friends in the labour movement around the world who are really helping us talk to governments and convene a dialogue to understand how all clean energy policies can be just people-centered and of course can be about protecting workers and communities and creating new and good quality jobs. And most recently, we published new data on energy jobs across the world. And for the first time ever in 2021, there are more jobs in clean energy sectors around the world than there are in traditional energy sectors. And that's only going to continue as a trend. By the end of this decade, governments around the world through their clean energy policies are going to create tens of millions of new clean energy jobs. And of course, this is good news, but we need to be aware that global averages are one thing, but what really matters is what happens on the ground to specific communities and workers and families who are affected in different ways by the changes in policies and by our clean energy goals that all governments are pursuing together and separately. And that's why it's really important that policies have a subtle on the ground ground perspective, and that each country, each region, each state, each community understand its needs in this regard. And that's why I'm really delighted that we're hearing from experts and thinkers in 3 countries that are really at the cutting edge of these issues, in South Africa, India, and Indonesia, where these issues are really live and current because they're so important to so many people, because they are complex and subtle, and because they need intelligent, open, transparent dialogue and good quality policy making. And I know we're going to learn a lot from the people joining us from those 3 countries today, where it really matters. And some of the lessons we've learned so far are telling us that well-designed policies, well-designed processes that are open and transparent, based on dialogue, based on good data, based on fairness, really can make a difference. But we also have learned that it's difficult. There are many challenges we face. There are many issues in terms of affordability, in terms of inclusion and fairness. And I know we're going to hear a lot of really interesting experiences today. So thanks again for joining us. We're really looking forward to hearing from you all, and delighted again that you could join us. Back to you, Jinsun.
Thank you very much, Brian. So as Brian mentioned, so we are really pleased to invite 3 very important countries to discuss about this very important labor implication issue with the clean energy transition. Sometimes when we are talking about clean energy transition, we sometimes forget about the just transition and labor implications and what it will have the impacts on the people. So I will continue to the panel discussion, inviting 5 very prominent speakers from these 3 countries. So we will have 5 speakers. First, Lebogang Mulaisi, Head of Policy Unit of Congress of South African Trade Unions. She's joining in person at the South Africa Pavilion. And also Mr. Paul Buta, Head of Secretariat of the Friends of Indonesia Renewable Energy, is currently joining virtually. Hello, Paul. And also Ms. Shubha Raha, Head of New Initiatives Council on Energy, Environment and Water, is joining in person. And also Ms. Dudu Sibia, Provincial Climate Change Coordinator, Department of Agriculture, Rural Development, Land and Environmental Affairs, Mpumalanga, South Africa, is joining virtually as well. And also we will have a speaker, Ms. Maria Emininta, Head of International Department, Indonesian Workers' Welfare Union, also joining virtually. Okay, given that we are currently sitting in the South African Pavilion, so maybe I would like to start the question. Question about the South Africa first. So Lebogang, given that I know that you have a very plenty of experiences as a head of policy at the Congress of South Africa Trade Union, which is the largest trade union federation in South Africa. And also you are also a member of the Presidential Climate Change Coordinating Commission, which is a coordinated body established to oversee the country's just transition strategy with members from government and civil society and labor unions and industry. So I want to learn, and I want to learn from your experience, and I want to hear your perspectives on this issue. So having been at the heart of just transition development in South Africa for a number of years, what do you think are the key points you have learned? And also, how do we go from principle to practice? So how we can implement those kind of things when we want to make clean energy transitions people-centered to protect employment and communities?
Thank you, Jensen, and thank you for your question. I think what's been a great benefit in terms of this work in South Africa is the establishment of the Presidential Climate Commission. I think that particular commission and how it's brought together such a broad range of stakeholders to come on board and to negotiate what we believe is the path for South Africa's just transition has been very important. I think inclusivity in the process of social dialogue is very important, and meaningful dialogue is very important. When planning for a transition, this has helped us develop and national determined contribution, South Africa being the only country that has a just transition embedded in their NDCs, which is very important because we're able to increase our ambition on climate and climate mitigation because we hold the aspirations of a just transition, as well as through the development of a framework for a just transition for South Africa, where for the first time, South Africa as a country has a common vision in terms of what a just transition looks like for our society. And in this vision, we have a broad and bold aspiration for what that future looks like. And I think that's been important. Now, how to take the policy and make it mean something for those that will be affected by it. It's important to take the discussions from a national level disaggregated to the people on the ground. And I think that's why a multi-stakeholder process like the Presidential Climate Change Commission and it's bringing together various parties, ourselves and the trade union movement has been so important because we have the relevant structures that allow us to disaggregate this information to the ground. Later on, we'll talk about how we envisage making use of our labor market and institutional capacity to make sure that these big concepts that are currently being articulated at a national level bear some sort of expression for workers on the ground, and they're implementable as policy and strategies for an actual transition that is practical and that is tangible for the person on the ground.
Thank you, Lebogang. That's really, really important point. So maybe now we move to maybe India experience as well. Then Ms. Shuva Raha, so you have been the head of the new initiative at the Delhi-based Council on Energy, Environment and Water in India. So you have been very active in this space. You have authored a number of reports on this topic, including jobs, growth and sustainability, a new social contract for India's recovery. So in IA's data, so there are many people are currently employed in the coal sector and many more if we were including informal workers as well. So just transition is very critical issue when we are talking about the clean energy transitions into the low carbon energy sources. So in the light of this situation as India prepares for its G20 presidency as well. So what do you think will be the key labor implications of the clean energy transitions in India? And what do you think will be the key ingredients for the transition to maximize opportunities for the people and new quality and good quality jobs?
Thank you, and my pleasure to be here today. When you say we have a lot of people in the coal sector, we are talking 20 million people. If you include the informal sector, 13 million directly employed, which is more than the cumulative population of 160 countries. It's bigger than the population of Zimbabwe. So that's the kind of people who are just directly employed in the coal industry. So when we originally started the whole pressure on India to phase out coal or to phase down coal, it's fairly simplistic. So we wanted to go into what does the data show us? I mean, what is required for this just transition? Because as an electoral democracy, the political will to make the transition becomes very, very important. It is not something that's statistically driven. In India, you have certain states, and we have 28 states and some union territories are only dependent on coal as. And these are the highly populated states. They're also the more socioeconomically backward states. So the burden that they pose economically on the political constituency over there becomes very important in making a transition. The other part is the revenue that is generated by these states. And just in 2019-20, the revenue that was given to the states from coal, the royalties and taxes was $460 billion. So we are talking that sort of money that is going into the state. A third problem that we have found is that it's not a 1:1 clean energy transition, because a lot of people think that we'll transition from coal to renewables as jobs in that place. And that is not what it is, because one, they're not in the same place, first of all. Two, the skills are not the same. Coal, generally that the population has are not skilled or not highly skilled. Renewables are highly skilled, and they're also fewer in ratio. So what we have been then looking at is alternate employment that is gainful for these people, right? So you can look at tourism, you can look at agriculture, you can look at distributed renewable energy for productive use. So post-farm operations like, fruits, making jams and pickles that these people can transition into. processing agriculture waste. We are also looking at a government scheme called One District, One Product, where the government is looking at localized employment for people who are expert in a certain skill set that can be produced and exported or sold in the country, to give them alternate livelihood opportunities. So that's where we're going towards, and we need to have a long-term transition plan starting from basic education, because they need to then be skilled for some other jobs. And I mean, here my colleague is coming from the union background, and our coal workers are also unionized. So the transition cost, compensation cost that we'll have to pay is to the range of about $4 to $5 billion one time, just to the workers who are employed, and that is not going to carry them through their lifetime. So we are not looking at just climate finance or project finance, but transition finance of several $1 billion over several years to make this change. So these are the issues that we have on the ground. That said, India has been extremely proactive on the sustainability front. We have NDCs that have 50% renewable energy capacity by 2030. We've already met our Paris Agreement targets that was originally given updated NDCs. But yes, we do not have just transition built into the NDC because we have more metric-driven NDCs, if you will. And that I think is a valuable point that you made, that it needs to really be a part of policy at that level. I'm going to stop there. I'm going to let you bring up some other questions, but that's it.
Thank you very much, Ishuba. I think it's really interesting that both of you were talking about the policy importance and also how to integrate these aspects into the NDC. And I know that many of the people here are actually negotiating and making the NDC. So I think this is a really important implication for the audience here. And now I want to move to our virtual speakers as well. So Paul, can you hear us? Okay. Paul, I would like to invite Paul, who is the head of the Secretariat of the Friends of Indonesia Renewable Energy. So as we know that there are more than 1 million people are currently employed in the Indonesia energy sector, with around 465,000 people working in the production and transportation of coal. So I would like to listen to, from your experience, you have already worked in the environment related fields more than 25 years. So I would like to have your view on the Indonesia, which has committed to net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2060. And where do you think opportunities and what do you think will be the key challenges in the current energy labor force in the Indonesia?
So, question is for me, right? Hello, can you hear
Yes,
me?
yes.
Okay. Thank you. Currently, Indonesia really enjoy the, let's say, the benefit of selling coal, producing and selling coal from a lot of regions in Indonesia. And as you may know already that there is already some effort done by government following the signing of the global coal to clean power last year in Glasgow, and then also as part of the commitment of government to reduce the use of coal power plant to generate electricity. Indonesia has just issued regulations that will open the opportunity to stop the development of new coal power plant, and also it opens or mandated the Ministry of Energy to start the development of roadmap for early retirement for coal power plant. What does it mean in coal to the industries? First, we will see that there will be in the future reduced, let's say, in Indonesia to be built, and means also there will be a lot of employee in the coal power plant that will be affected by this policy. However, if it is only related to the coal power plant, there will be actually not much impact as long as there will be a new development of renewable energy, so that these people could be retrained and they could, let's say, work for the new coal renewable energy projects. We might not see the how do you call it, direct impact on the coal mining, because the demand on coal is still high in a lot of countries. So, but we will see in the future, maybe in 5-10 years time, that the demand might be reduced. There will be impact of the employee, of course. But the most important thing, or the most people that will be affected later on by the reduction of the demand in coal, reduction in the production of coal, is actually not directly in the mining itself, but because if there will be a lot of mechanism that could be done by companies, for example, paying the compensation, early retirement of the employee, or retraining and so on. But the most affected people will be actually people that work in the informal sector, or people that work related to the logistic in the supply chain of the coal itself. That would be the let's say, the thing that we need to look at in more detail. Actually, we had a discussion. We had a meeting with ILO a few weeks ago, together with the union and others, with Minister of Labor and other stakeholders, saying that we really need to look at this issue as well. So we don't have to focus only on the employee and the miners, but also we have to look at the issue with the local government that rely their revenue on the levy or tax for the coal production. So that would be the we need to look at.
Thank you very much, Paul. So you mentioned about many different issues related to the just transition, and one of the issue you mentioned at the end was about the local governments also have a role to play. Maybe I will then move to Ms. Judu Sibia, who is the Provincial Climate Change Coordinator at the Mpumalanga Department of Agriculture, Rural Development, Land and Environmental Affairs, who can share the experience and the lessons learned from the provincial perspective. So Mpumalanga is an eastern province of South Africa. Coal mining is at the center of the local economy, and a number of the power stations, of the coal power stations, will be shut down by 2035, and their future is really being affected by these kind of procedures. So Juju, let me ask you this question. So what do you think will be the key opportunity for these workers who will be affected in your province? And are you aware of any kind of best practice initiatives we can share and we can learn from your province experience?
Thank you very much, Jensen. What you highlighted, if you look basically at Mpumalanga, before we get into the just transition, we are already negatively impacted by climate change. So if you check basically now, there's another slab of just transition risks that are coming in Mpumalanga. So basically, Mpumalanga accounts more than 50% of the greenhouse gas of South Africa. And basically, again, we are economically dependent on the coal sector. And then not only looking at the coal sector, but looking at the whole value chain and the impact that is going to have on the labor, especially, and in community and municipalities. So most of the time when we are checking on all this, we are normally looking at labor and communities and excluding municipalities, whereas they are on the risky group too. Because more than anything, the land is mostly associated with the municipalities' activities on service delivery and all these other issues. So at the same time, because of the reduction, currently, as I've said, that 50% of the emissions is coming from this side. We know that if the focus is more on Mpumalanga, you mean that you'll be reducing 50% of the greenhouse gases. So meaning that we have to have sort of like strong policies and on how are we going to disseminate all that kind of information to all the risky group that I've mentioned. Not only labor, but the community in large. So currently what we have noticed as in Mpumalanga, we started developing the climate change mitigation strategy because we wanted to understand what are we dealing with. And then after that, from that process, we develop a just transition phase 1 plan. In that the transition phase 1 plan, we're looking on how are we going to tackle this issue of the just transition, because we've got 12 power stations, and as we have by the 2035, 9 of them will be closed. So in terms of the integrated resource plan that has been developed. So we just have to try to say, how are we going to align ourselves on that? So through that whole process of the development, we realized that we really need to focus on social dialogues and make sure that we have sort of a democratic governance that is going to be entailed with all the affected sectors, at the same time community, labor, and then researchers, all the people that are going to make a lot of contribution, but mostly the municipality should be the part and parcel, as most of their policies are supposed to drive the transition. At the same time, and to the skilling upgrade, upscaling, and then retraining, who are supposed to be retrained at what particular time, and who are supposed to do that. At the same time, but as I'm talking like that, we have to have a detailed cost-benefit analysis report that is going to determine to say, so many people will be lost, jobs will be lost on this value chain. And then after that, how are we going to get into the new value chain that we're getting into? So at the same time, as we're just looking at that, again, we are looking at economic diversification. We looked at as an opportunity, we realized that the renewables might not be able to absorb all the jobs that are going to be affected and lost. So somehow the diversification, we have to look at the nature-based solutions. And then we have to look at sustainable aviation fuel generation through the other natural resources, but at the same time trying to balance all these other issues, green hydrogen. So there's a lot of opportunities that can come, but it needs to be well coordinated and be governed by each and every part. So at the same time, if you check Boyce on that, we came up with a just transition landscape of not only looking at what is happening at the moment, but how are we going to diversify and have a landscape of identifying all transition risks, the effects, and how are we going to roll it out? We're looking at economy. How is it going to affect the local economy? Do they going to have the ownership of whatever technology that is coming in within their space? Looking at technically all the spectrum of technology that are coming in, at what cost? Is it not going to affect the municipalities, basically, in tariffs? So this is a whole spectrum. That's why I said, like, the just transition is very much complicated. And it's not going to be conducted by one person, but it has to be a consolidated sort of like mandate of each and every country on how are they going to address it in very effective. The closure of mine, how is it going to be affected? At the same time, we look at the social effect. How are they socially going to be impacted? And currently, there's a lot of immigration people that are coming in, still looking for the job opportunities in the mining sector, whereas we are saying that we are just like phasing out and we are decommissioning. So these are the aspects that we have to consider so that we don't raise other social ills, you understand, on that. Because like the spatial misalignment, it can cause a lot of challenges. that is going to attach to that, and the population increase. And at the same time, still looking at the environment, because these are the significant effect that we have. We are currently with water, we have water pollution, air pollution, and at the same time, land pollution. How can we consolidate all those things? But the policies that are coming in, I think they framework, as we are going to develop it more national, a community, municipality, labor is what we've already started. Even at the Premier's office, this is what we've already started politically.
Hello.
Driving it so that it can.
Okay, I think there was a little bit of connection fraction at the end. Do you want to repeat the last sentences?
I was just saying that because the transition is not going to affect one sector department, it's going to affect all the provincial sector departments. We realize that it has to be escalated to the Premier's office that is going to be coordinating all these issues. So currently we have established the Just Transition Climate Change working group. And after that, it's going to be other forums that we're going to engage labor effectively. And at the same time, on the labor space, they've already started establishing the climate change, just transition, labor and community community steering committee, where they want to ensure that they are in the same page on these issues. So this is this kind of initiatives that has already been done. Thank you very much, Johnson.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dudu. So I can see that it's really complicated and a complex of different matters. We need to think about economy. We need to think about welfare. We need to think about environment, and also negative impacts from the climate change, which is also adaptation part. So I think given that all the different facets, different aspects of this matter, so I would like to listen to some particular perspective from the labor's union. So Ms. Maria Emenita, are you there? Okay, okay, then I think we need to move to the second questions. Given that I think what I heard really often, frequently from what you are saying is about the training and also the investment for the training and how to collaborate from the multilateral aspects. And I would like to ask the second question to Lebo. So I always wanted to ask you about the question because last COP was very important to South Africa because of the announced South Africa Just Energy Transition Partnership, a pledge of 8.5 billion from a new global North countries to help South Africa shift from coal. We would like to talk about the South Africa's Just Energy Transition Investment Plan, which set out the details of your country's plans building on the previous announcements from 1 year ago. So it will be a total of USD 83 billion over the next 5 years, is it correct? So you have been very active in this space. So how do you see the Just Energy Transition Partnership taking shape, and what has been and how do you see the role of the COSATU, of your trade union, in ensuring the new Just Energy Transition Investment Plan delivers its just transition aims?
Thank you, Jensen. So the question of finance is always a tricky conversation to have, because you pointed out the fact that a transition in its nature is very complex. So quite naturally, even the financial question will also be complex. I mean, we've seen it in the investment plan that, you know, in its origination, this idea around developed nations assisting developing countries is born in the principles of the Paris Agreement. There probably needs to be deeper interrogation in terms of how far developed nations need to go in terms of their support for developing countries. I think if you've heard the experience from various other countries, this transition poses significant risks to sectors that rely on high fossil fuel activities. And in order for us to increase our ambition, we need to talk about how ambitious developed countries need to be in terms of financing and assisting developing countries to finance the transition. So, you know, it's a good step forward, and that's what we've been saying as an organization. It's a good step forward in the sense that it takes us finally to the question where we talk about the principles of, you know, common but differentiated responsibility, but most importantly, the principles around developed nations stepping up to assist developing nations in order to be able to transition. I think our engagement in the process has been that we want to make sure that, because for the reasons that have already been articulated, especially in the Indian experience, we know that the job creation is not going to be from one energy sector to another or from one energy source to another. It's going to be in how well you unlock manufacturing. It's how well you're able to unlock the manufacturing pipeline and how best you can localize these activities. Because we understand that you don't want to displace workers. Dudu has been talking about what's happening in the Mpumalanga region. You don't want to create ghost towns. This is not good for communities who are being expected to transition away from high fossil fuel activities. So by creating the necessary economic activities within regions, we're keeping these provinces in operation, and we're keeping them economically viable. So, I mean, the investment plan has been launched in South Africa. On Friday, the president did indicate that there will be a process to engage and negotiate on some of the aspects on this and to strengthen, because it's a living document, to strengthen the investment plan. And we'll be talking more about how do we unlock local manufacturing in South Africa. Africa has unfortunately gone through a process of deindustrialization over the past 20 years. We want to change this tide, and we want to make use of partnerships of this nature to be able to do that. We understand the investment plan is seen to be a model for the rest of the world. So there's an immense pressure from South Africa to make sure that other countries, as they get their own partnerships underway, they get a process that is sound, given the experience that what's come from the South African experience. So we're building on this. It's a continuous process. It's not come to its logical conclusion as yet. It's an ongoing process. But again, we're putting in our narratives around how do we ensure that there's mass job creation, but not just job creation, because then that limits the conversation to just workers' needs. But more broadly, how do we increase community participation? How do we increase the participation of informal sector workers who are not necessarily taken into consideration because they're not formally employed? And the investment plan needs to talk about things like this. And this is the continuous work that ourselves and the trade union and other progressive organizations will be working towards.
Thank you very much, Lebo. So I agree that there is more collaboration and cooperation between the developed economies and developing economies, and also, you know, we are also calling it as a global North and South cooperation. Those kind of cooperation, international cooperation, which should be agreed at this moment at the negotiations. So I think that this aspect is very key, central role for the just energy transition and people-centered clean energy transitions. So I would like to also hear from the experience from Indonesia, from Paul. So in your opinion, which key labor issues do you think a just energy transition partnership for Indonesia should address? And what do you see as a potential for such a model for the North-South cooperation with Indonesia to take place?
Thank you for this question. As I mentioned previously, the main in the context of coal power plant or coal mining, for example, one of the important issue is really about training, capacity building, so that they could, for example, go to other business just in case there would be closure of the mining. That would be one of the main issues, actually. However, there will be also very important to look at the business transformations. A mining company, when it comes to coal, for example, we are talking about emissions, and the emissions is only because they burn the coal to generate electricity and release CO2 emissions. But will coal only be used for power sector, for thermal? Could coal be used for other use? For example, just do gasifications, and from the gas, syngas that would be produced, then you could convert that into let's say ammonium or so. So looking at other use of the product, other use of coal for the business itself would be important, and therefore it would become very important on the labor as well, to look at, to engage in dialogue with the business on how they could, let's say, work together to look at the opportunity, not only to use the coal that would generate CO2 emissions, but also for let's say, looking at the opportunity for business transformation. So maybe at the end they would not mine coal anymore, but do something else. For example, the area that would be used for coal mining, that would be used, for example, to plant trees that produce pellets or biopellets or whatsoever. And then when it comes to the dialogue that would be needed, the dialogue that we have last time, facilitated by ILO, it was really a kind of a productive dialogue that we have, where the ministries, the Minister of Planning and Development were there, and the Minister of Labor were there as well. And then I was representing the employer associations, and there were also labor union and so on. That kind of dialogue would actually be important to understand the positions of each actors, each stakeholders, so that we could come up with actionable plan, how to engage, how to look for solutions, how to let's say look for alternative when it comes to this just energy transitions issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. So I can hear from Lebo and Paul about the business transformation and community perspective. We need to think about it's not only about the employee, but also about it's changing the local economy and the people's life in the local community. So actually, Shuva, I would like to ask you a question about if you can introduce any kind of good solutions, good practices and examples, how the coal regions, coal producing companies and coal producing laborers, they can diversify their local economies to protect their revenue, but also at the same time mitigating potential future job losses.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk about how we have been working at the council with the government at multiple levels and with industry. So at the national level, for example, we've worked with our government to come up with a distributed renewable energy policy for productive livelihoods. So that is using microgrids or mini grids in these remote areas to create a supply of energy that then allows them to use refrigerators or milk chillers or food processors locally to produce goods in that economy and then connect it to the mainstream trade that we have in the country. So what that does is, one, it prevents the drudgery of hunting for coal or using coal-based cook stoves and so on. So it improves health, it saves time, but it also gets the women and the local youth and the local population gainfully engaged in industry, right? So, and we call this taking things from the margins to the mainstream. So that's one part. We are now working with state governments, which are these coal-rich states, to also introduce clean energy systems into their energy ecosystem. So we have a state called Jharkhand, which is a socioeconomically backward state, but a very, very coal-rich state. And we've just recently had them announce the solar energy policy of the state, which we work with them on. And it's a 4 gigawatt project, which in the scheme of India's renewable energy is slightly small. But again, proof of concept that we can introduce clean energy systems into the states which also have coal. And then, at the larger G20 or participation level, our government has just come up with something called Mission Life, which is Lifestyles for Environment. And we work with the government to frame the mission document, and now we're doing the economic framework. And what it proposes are 3 principles. And this is not restricted to India. It's going to be quite prevalent now that we take over the presidency. So one part is to nudge behaviors towards more sustainable practices, and not just individual, not just reuse bottles and things, but at a community, at a corporate level, and at a country level. How do you transform to a more sustainable production and consumption system altogether? And then on the back of that comes enabling the markets, that how do you serve this sustainable requirement that's coming up here? Because these are new industries that are being planned, we think that we can skill people fresh up rather than transition. Like, if it's new to everybody, not just to them, but to us as well. And then using this market system, and that's a global value chain, right? It's not just restricted to that little village. And we go to influencing policies backwards again, state to national to international, because product value chains are not national, supply chains are not national. We also think that doing something like this is going to prevent what she talked about, which was migration. Not just migration outwards, which creates ghost towns, but it also is flooding the urban areas. And people, when they leave their hometowns and they go to an urban area, first of all, they get into labor forces or house helps. They do not have gainful employment. The living conditions are abysmal. The urban people's infrastructure is also pressured. And it's a lose-lose for everybody. We feel that creating this economic opportunities back home is not only going to let them stay there, but also be prosperous over there. And that is what we call sustainability for all, and that's justice for all. And that's what at every level we are working with. And I'm very hopeful that our G20 presidency is going to bring up these topics in energy transition, but also in achieving the sustainable development goals, all 17 of them. How can these countries come together? And we've been advising our government on the G20, and we've told them to break the silos in the working groups. Energy transition only looks at energy transition, SDGs are looking at something else. The finance track, we have actually got de-risking finance for such projects into the Sherpa track. So there's a lot of cross conversation that we want to facilitate. So I'm very, very hopeful. I'm looking forward.
Thank you very much, Shiva. So I totally agree that we need to think about the cross-cutting issues. The just transition issue in the energy sector is particularly very cross-cutting issue, which we need to think about inclusiveness. And it's not only about the different type of people, different type of labors, but also we need to think about the different level of the approaches, from the really local level, individual level, to the government national level, and also international level, as you mentioned. So I would like to ask the follow-up question to Dudu about the most pressing challenges, if she can share about the subnational government in terms of the supporting an inclusive people-centered energy transition. So Dudu, floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you very much again. I think personally, when I highlighted most of the challenges and the pressing measures, I think somehow we are focusing more on the challenges to a certain extent that it overwhelmed us. But if you look, basically, transition is happening. We are not in a rehearsing space that you get an opportunity to say, just go and rehearse and then come back and see how is it gonna work. We are in it in Mpumalanga. And through that whole process, if you check basically, you look at the community side, their concern of the employment, their concern of local ownership, their concern of the local entrepreneurship and regional economy in totality. And at the same time, They are very much concerned. I'm looking at the sort of community space when we are engaging with them more. They're concerned of the awareness and consultation. It's just that it's kind of a complex of consultation. You can consult 1,000 people, but they'll still say, we haven't been consulted. So somewhere, somehow, these are the major issues when it's happening at the local, at the community level. On the labor, they are concerned of the decent and sustainable jobs, the transparency and accountability, and how is it going to be governed by all these other issues. When you look at the subnational, there's a lot of concern of the policy alignment, readiness to take over this big elephant that is coming into the room. And then how are they going to dissect it? Because basically, you look at the land, you look at the technologies, you look, there's a spectrum and the diversification. Are they going to be able to manage the service delivery with all these coming issues? So somewhere, somehow, these are the other elements that we are just looking at. But at the same time, not only to look at all these challenges, but just at the same time to see how can you strive forward. The PCC, I think Lebogang has highlighted even in the beginning, the is already taking
Dudu? I think we have some issues in connection, and I think we have
on ensuring that they make them aware, just like your anger, until your kind of, yes.
Do we have some kind of fractions in your?
Do you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay, thank you so much. I was just highlighting all this, but
okay, well, we have been kind of trained by the virtual and technical, remote conferencing thing for more than 2 years now, but we still have connection issues sometimes. So, Dudu, could you finish what you mentioned that I think we lost the last part? Okay, we have some issues, so maybe I think that
as we want to the community and to the labor and government. I'm so sorry for that.
No, it's okay. I'm so sorry for this, Dudu. So I think we are almost on time. So I think, is there any kind of questions which was raised in the virtual link? So in the meantime, actually, I would like to ask the speakers to share your kind of final words, because I heard many different concepts, and I can see that it's a very complicated issue and requires many supports and collaboration from different stakeholders. So I would like to ask you the final words, that what should be the most urgent issue we need to address for the just transition in terms of the clean energy transition. So could you share what should be the most important part to implement this one? And before moving that one, we have one question from Natasha. So it's about, this is an ideal opportunity for South Africa to mention the actual closure of Komati coal power station, the training center, and the deployment of existing staff. It is beyond policy and plans. It is a living achievement and has earned funding from the World Bank. South Africa can now use the lessons learned and repeat this model and 4 other coal power stations. Thank you for your comments, Natasha. So I think we all agree that we can learn from many different examples and best practices, and which can be applicable to other countries as well. So maybe can I start with the levels and what should be the most urgent issue we need to address?
So there's a lot. But I think the development question is very important. If you listen to the countries that have been talking here today, we're grappling with how best do we develop? So how do we get the right skills to be able to do this? How do we diversify our economies? But more importantly, how do we enhance community exclusion? So the Komati example is very important, but it only takes care of the workers. We need to broaden it so that community participation and involvement is also taken into consideration. So the role of our governments are also important in this transition. They don't just play a regulatory role. They're hands-on, they're involved, they fund the transition. So Komati is great, but what about the community in the area? So we need to talk about better inclusion of communities in these processes of transition. It's not just taking care of the workers, it's broader than that.
Thank you, Shuva.
So I'm going to build on that and say that we need to have the communication to the grassroots of the necessity of this transition. It cannot be a top-down imposition on the people, then it's not inclusive, nor are they informed. So we have, the way we've done with the pandemic, the way we took all 1.5 billion people along was to have every level of the government and social workers and NGOs be informed, tell them about the vaccines, get it to them, make them understand, and then have the pull come from them to change. And we think that proof of concept becomes very, very important at the very, very micro level to show them that this will work, it does not harm them, it benefits them. So to that end, organizations like mine are doing things like powering livelihoods, where we're showing mine to market commercialization of certain technologies. The government is working to show benefits to communities. Industries are doing what they can locally to generate employment. And that is eventually going to feed back up the loop and going to have this people-centered transition that we talked about. It's by the people and for the people and of the people. So we have to focus on the democratic process of this.
Thank you, Shiva. So Paul, could you share your answer? I think Paul is on mute.
Oh, congratulations. Hello. Can you please repeat the question?
So Paul, we heard many different issues to achieve just transition in the clean energy transition. So could you pick up the most important urgent topic we should address?
The most important one really is communicating the impact. So, or before communicating the impact, we need to really understand what would be the impact of this just transitions to all stakeholders, starting in particular to those people that mostly affected by the transitions. As I mentioned before, if it is in the coal power plant or in the mining, normally the company they will have their procedures if there is an impact to their employee. But how about the people that are not in the companies? What would be the impact on them? So understanding the impact on everybody involved in the supply chain, in the community, in the government, that would be the first priority that need to be done to conduct studies, so that everybody will be able to understand what to do, and later on how look for options to let's say mitigate the
Thank you, Paul. So Dudu, floor is yours. Dudu, are you still with us? Okay. Okay, thank you for joining our event, and I really appreciate all of you to join this panel, and I really learned very exciting and also very challenging stories about how to implement the just transition in the energy sector. So I think this one is a very important topic, and not in terms of the mitigation, but also in the adaptation and also considering all the development and welfare issues. So thank you very much for joining our event. Also, thank you everyone who is joining from web.
Thank you. And I want to compliment IEA for having this people-centered energy transition, because I think it was the first report that really had those recommendations concretized. It's a pleasure to be a part of that. Thank you.
Thank you for mentioning, Shiva. So please visit actually IEA's webpage on the People-Centered Transition Commission's recommendations about how to implement the just transition in the energy sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.